Hey guys, welcome to the Awakening Report. I'm your host, Doug Hamp. Today I am taking your questions, looking forward to it. Always enjoy taking you guys' questions. Just want to let you know that you can put your question in the comment section, and I will go ahead and do my very best to get to that. Love having those. Before we get started, I want to let you know that you can support this ministry by going to my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/Doug Hamp, and you can give a gift of any amount. It's up to you. So thank you. $2 is awesome, and more is awesome as well. So thank you very much. That helps keep the lights on and feed the family and all that stuff. So thank you. Also, we have a trip coming up April 2021 with the Way Congregation. So go to thewaycongregation.com and you can check out the details for that trip. I would love for you to come with us. That would be so fun if you could join us, because it's really going to be a great time. So why don't you look into it? Come with us. It'll be good. And of course, this Shabbat, we have our service coming up. So hope you guys can join us right here on this channel. Starting at 10:30, we have worship. We have some time of reading the scriptures, and then we get into the study, and we're going to be starting in 1 Corinthians. I just kept praying about it, and that was the passage that came up. So without any further ado, let's get to your questions. This is from Ron Batchelder, he says, is Isaiah 66:17, who are they that sanctify themselves, especially in light of 1 Corinthians 3:12-15 seems to be a dire warning. All right, well, let's take a look at that text. That is always the first thing we want to do. Isaiah 66, verse 17. So this passage here, if I understand the question, let's just look at the text. That'll probably help us understand the question. Those who sanctify themselves and purify themselves to go to the gardens after an idol in the midst, eating swine's flesh, and the abomination and the mouse shall be consumed together, says the Lord. Now, the context of when this is happening, notice here that the Lord will come with fire, with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury, and with his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and by his sword, the Lord will judge all flesh, and the slain of the Lord will be many. And so then he's going to judge these people who do these things, that sanctify themselves, purify themselves. They go to the gardens after an idol, and they eat swine's flesh and the abomination and the mouse. Okay, so a couple of things to consider there. First of all, Jesus is coming back, right? That's the first thing. Secondly, his dietary laws have not changed. Now, sometimes people say, well, wait, can't we eat all things? We can eat all foods. Sure, you can eat all foods. You can absolutely eat any food you like. But here's the deal. God told us what is food and what is not food. So we look at Leviticus chapter 11, and he tells us things like swine, mouse, shrimp, lobster, rats, etc. Those are not food. They just don't qualify as food. And I would agree that rat is not food. I think that's just nasty. Some things I'm like, why would you ever eat that? That is not food. Some things because it's very much not cultural to, it's not culturally relevant as an American to eat things like rat. We would just never think about it. We would never think of eating dog. We never think of eating cat. That just would not happen in America, right? Because for us, those are not food. We understand that you can stick them in your mouth and swallow, but it doesn't make it food. But that's what God is saying. He's like, look, these things are not food. So what's interesting about that little passage there is that the Romans were especially known to eat mice. That was considered a delicacy there. But it's not only about eating, right? These are also people that are sanctifying themselves and purifying themselves in these gardens. We don't know exactly what that means. They're going after an idol, apparently. That's in italics. That tells us not actually in the text. And they're eating these three things: the swine's flesh, the abomination. We don't know what that is. We're not told what the abomination is and what the mouse is. But the people that eat these three things, that do these things in these gardens, will be consumed together. So, I don't want to go beyond the text. I don't want to not say what's in the text. So clearly the text is saying, look, don't eat those things. And when Jesus comes back, people that are eating those things. Now the question is it people that are eating those things in these gardens that are sanctifying themselves, or just people that eat those in general? That's a tough question. We have to be careful that we don't go beyond the logical boundaries of what the text is saying, because then we're reading too much into it. But we do know, we have it on very good record. Leviticus chapter 11, right? God's word. He says, don't eat certain animals. Now he does tell us what animals are food. I want to take you there just so you get a sense of what that is actually saying, so that it's not me telling you, but it's God telling you. So Leviticus 11, speak to the children of Israel, saying, these are the animals which you may eat. All right. So look, which you may eat, right? So that means that they are food. In Hebrew, the word to eat and the word for food, to eat is lechol, and food is ochel. They're the same exact root, right? So these are things that you can feed on, and these things are food, right? They'd be equivalent in English. So he's telling us, look, this stuff you can eat. This stuff is not food. This is food. That's not food. And he tells us very clearly. In fact, he gives us an incredible list, and he gives us principles by which we may know. Among the animals, whatever divides the hoof, having cloven hooves, and chewing the cud, that you may eat. All right, so that pretty much narrows it down. Like cows, right? They have a cloven hoof, and they chew the cud. Now, wait a second. Pigs have a cloven hoof, but guess what? They don't chew the cud. So therefore, those are not considered to be food in God's view. Not mine, but in God's view. Not the Jews, not the church, not anybody, but God's view. God is telling us this is the stuff that you can eat, and this is the stuff you can't eat. Now, insofar as Isaiah's text is concerned, because again, he's not only talking about what you can or cannot eat. He's not saying that anybody who eats pig is done for, but he's talking about these people who sanctify themselves and purify themselves to go to the gardens after an idol, eating the swine's flesh. All right. So this is my opinion. I can give you guys my opinion. Right. So this is how I would interpret that it's not just a blanket statement for anybody who eats pork. If you had bacon this morning, you're done for. I don't think that is the carpet statement that God is saying, but it's really all those things together. They are people that are going to these gardens. They are worshiping idols. And as part of that idol worship, they are also consuming things that God said not to consume. So what I would suggest is, in order to be in really big trouble based on that text, is you have to do all three things. Right. So if you just eat bacon, I don't recommend it. Pig bacon, that is, right? I don't recommend that. And I would suggest you don't do that, because God's word clearly says not to do that. But I don't think that we can extend that and say, well, if you do that, then God's going to smite you when he comes back. I think that would be going beyond what the text is actually saying. Now, while we're on the topic, let me just give you another passage, because I know this is going to come up. Someone's going to say, yeah, what about 1 Timothy chapter 4? Well, let's go to 1 Timothy chapter 4. Now, the Spirit expressly says that in latter times, some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry, and commanding to abstain from foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving. All right, so there they would say, look, come on, Doug, you're reading this thing all wrong. God says, Paul is telling us that we can eat anything. Well, I agree. Paul says that we can eat all foods, and it would be demons who tell us that we cannot eat foods that what? Let's read it again. Foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving. So it is certainly a demon of doctrines that will say you cannot eat that food. But what did we just learn in Leviticus chapter 11? Is swine, etc., is that considered food in God's economy? No, it's not. Just as an American, I would never consider dog to be food. I would never consider cat to be food, because that's just like, we don't do that. And that's the same thing in God's economy, in God's culture. He says, no, those things are not food. And that's really the bottom line, is that when we come to Christ, what that means is that we're now in a kingdom where we value God's values, right? Now, again, just to use America as an analogy, people often want to come to America because of the benefits they get. And when they do, they become an American, and they take on at least part of the American culture. They have to live by the American standards. They have to live by the laws of America. That's the same analogy that we have when we come into the kingdom of God. We come in through Christ, but we live according to his commandments. We live according to his culture, his values, his standards. So this question, it's a great question, Ron. I thank you for asking that. And I just hope that people can understand this, that abstaining from foods, right? So this is not saying that, demons are going to tell you to abstain from pork. In fact, just the contrary. When we look in Scripture, what we see, when you remember when Jesus was crossing the Sea of Galilee and he went to the other side, and there he met Legion. Remember that guy? Right? So he crossed over and he meets Legion. And the demons are saying, look, if you're going to cast us out, cast us into those swine over there. Now that's interesting. Why were there swine in the land of Israel? Well, of course, that was Decapolis, right? So that was already a Greek cultured area. But that area, very interestingly, was part of the land of Bashan. So when Jesus crossed the Sea of Galilee, he was crossing from Israelite territory. It's also called the land of the Gentiles by that time. A lot of history had taken place up until then, but nevertheless, he crossed over into Decapolis, which was a Greek area, though formally it was part of Israel, and that was the land of Bashan. The land of Bashan is known as the land of the snake dragon. That's where Og, king of the Bashan, was from. And all kinds of crazy stuff was happening there. It was a stronghold for demonic activity. And it's not surprising that you have pig farmers there, pig herders that were hanging out there, because that was part of the deal. And so the demons wanted to go into the pigs because that was more comforting than just being cast out. So we see connections between pigs and demons. Now, look, I'm not saying that if a Christian is eating bacon that they're working for the devil. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, look, God said not to eat it. So if you're that person, if you're eating your pork and your shrimp, and you say, well, I can do all things in Christ. Well, I mean, you can do anything you want, right? You can commit murder. God's not going to stop you, but you will face the consequences. That's the thing, right? That's the beauty of God, is that he lets us do all kinds of stuff. He gives us freedom. But then we have to own up to the consequences of those actions. So many reasons not to eat pork and other things. I just heard recently somebody who ate about some snails or a slug or something, and they got some kind of a brain malfunction. I forget what it was. Someone that was eating pork, they had worms in their brain. Somebody ate a lizard on a dare, and that messed up their brain, and it killed them. I mean, this is, most people are going to make it, but a lot of people don't. So God said, don't do it. So then why do it, right? Why do it? Why risk it when God said don't? Because God actually cares about our health. All right. Thank you, Ron, for that question. I hope that gave you few things to chew on. This is from Stephen from the UK. Can you give your understanding of the two genealogies for Yeshua and Matthew and Luke, and who is Joseph's real father, Jacob or Heli? What about the curse on the line of Jeconiah? All right, great question. There's a lot to unpack in that. So we don't know exactly, okay, but I would suggest, and the theory that I believe is the most plausible, is that both Mary and Joseph were in the line of David. So the book of Matthew is taking the genealogy of David through Solomon, then to Jesus, whereas the book of Luke is taking it from David to one of his sons, Nathan, and then eventually to Jesus. So they're both of the line of David. That is the suggestion there, that they were both part of that. Now, who is his real father? Again, there's discussion about this. Some people have suggested that the book of Luke might actually have recorded Joseph's two fathers, if that makes any sense, and not in some weird kind of way, but two fathers, maybe one that could have been a stepfather, assuming that perhaps his biological father died, and then he was adopted by another father. So I cannot tell you which one is his actual real father, whether it was Jacob or Heli. I don't know the answer to that. And as far as the curse on the line of Jeconiah, well, God went around that so that the physical curse was broken. So that, of course, Joseph not bringing any DNA to Jesus, what only served as an adopted father, which did confer all the rights of that position. But it did not pass, obviously, the blood or the DNA did not pass from that. And so the curse of Jeconiah was sidestepped by not having him be a physical descendant. I hope that helps, Stephen. Thanks so much. Glad you tuned in from the UK. It's really awesome. So you probably can get some soup pretty soon. All right, this is from Ed. Is there any meaning to the 400 years of silence between the two covenants? Well, good question, Ed. I don't know of anywhere that it is spoken of. When we think about the number 400, of course, we go back to Genesis chapter 15, and there God spoke to Abraham, or Abram at that time, and he said that, know for certain that your descendants will be slaves, and that he will bring them out in the fourth generation. So there'll be 400 years in a land that's not their own, and he'll bring them out in the fourth generation. So that, to my knowledge, is the only place where we have this 400 years. And I don't know if there's a parallel to that. I cannot think of any that would explain that. Now, part of the challenge, I mean, I understand what you're saying by two covenants. You're talking about the Old Testament, those corpus of books, and then we have the New Testament. So from the last prophet to speak, which was, well, I want to say Malachi. Of course, we have Zechariah, we have Haggai. These are the Second Temple prophets. So around 400 and something before Christ, and then of course we don't have anything until John the Baptist comes, and he is telling everybody the good news that the Messiah is coming. So why would there be that silence? Well, first of all, we don't know that there was absolute silence from God. We don't have any books written, any biblical books written at that point. We have lots of intertestamental, or what are called Second Temple, sometimes called pseudepigraphical books. They're pseudepigrapha because they are books that were written, such as the book of Enoch. There's lots of debate as to who wrote that. I think Enoch may have written parts of it. I'm not convinced that he wrote all of it. We also have the Wisdom of Solomon. That, very unlikely that was actually written by Solomon. But when you say you write something about wisdom, you're like, well, no one's going to read a book, written by little me. But if Solomon wrote it, well, then people want to read that. And so during this period, there are a lot of books that were written that contain a lot of wonderful wisdom, a lot of great insights. The book of Maccabees, I mean, there you see God's hand. I mean, this was a book that was written down to capture what happened in those days. So, it doesn't have that same imprint of "Thus saith the Lord." There's no prophet who is speaking in the name of God during that time. A few reasons, again, I'm just speculating, but we know that Alexander the Great came in, in the 300s, somewhere in there. And I forget the exact year. I think it was 350, something like that, 340. And he apparently went into Jerusalem. They showed him the prophecy of Daniel. He was impressed by that. And he left in peace. Nothing happened. But then, of course, he died. His kingdom is split up between his 4 generals. And then the Seleucids sort of inherit the area of Israel. And then their influence becomes very prevalent. So we're looking at the late 200s, the early 300s, late 200s. So, 320, 310, 290, right, BC, somewhere in there, we start having a lot of consistent Greek influence in Israel. So much so that they eventually would build a gymnasio, right, a gymnasium. The word gymnasio actually means place to be naked. Okay, that's gymnos means naked. So this is where, of course, the young men would go. They would train naked. They would learn philosophy, etc. But they would also work their bodies and stuff. So a lot of Greek influence, which then led to all kinds of internal strife, etc. And we really have this Hellenization going on of Judea. So by the time we get to the Maccabees, along comes Antiochus Epiphanes. He says, look, you guys can no longer do your Jewish stuff, right? You can no longer circumcise your kids. You can't celebrate the Sabbath. You have to eat pork. And he does that. He tells them they have to eat pig. And of course, there's a revolt. And it was probably a good thing, because really what he did is he drew a line in the sand. Are you going to follow this God or not? Because they were waffling in their walk. Again, why there was not a prophet during those days, I don't know. That's above my pay grade. But there was no prophet. But there were books that were recording what was happening, and we can certainly glean a lot from those. And then obviously we know that when Jesus comes on the scene, things are bad, and he then comes to really bring people back to the Father, to teach them God's word, to teach them Torah, to teach them like this is what God was actually talking about when he said, do this and don't do that. So he shows them what it looks like to keep the Torah. And, that's of course a huge blessing at that time. So, again, I can't really tell you why there's the silence. That's kind of one of those questions from silence, right? But we can we at least understand that there were things happening during those times. So it wasn't completely silent. There was just no unction from God himself. There was no prophet that was speaking. So far as we know, there was no prophet that was speaking God's words directly. Thanks, Ed. All right, this is from Patriot Hippie. He says, hey, Doug, not necessarily a Bible question, but is there a particular Dead Sea Scrolls translation book you would recommend? Also, any other books you strongly suggest reading? Thanks. Well, if you really want to dig into the Dead Sea Scrolls, I would just go online. There's so much information online that you can look at the scrolls. You can actually see the very scrolls themselves. And unless you know those fonts really well, then you might want to read them through a transcription. And of course, if you don't know Hebrew, then you want to read it in a translation. But there's lots and lots of resources that talk about that. I would just Google it, quite frankly. The great thing about the Dead Sea Scrolls, of course, is that they are evidence that the Masoretic text that we use for the basis of the Hebrew Bible, we see that there's very few alterations, modifications, or deviancies between that. So that's really good news. That tells us that we have a very reputable transmission of the text based on that. Other books that I'd recommend reading. Well, I really like the Treasury of Scripture Knowledge. That is just an amazingly good reference. It's a Bible reference. It gives you the references. It's a cross-reference, but it's a super cross-reference. And I think you would certainly enjoy that. I like Thomas Constable. I think he's a great commentator, even though he's pre-trib and dispensational, which I'm not anymore. But I think he's still a great scholar. And I think you could really benefit from reading him. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any other guys. There's lots of stuff out there. There's no question about it. And I like to consult different people, but nobody that's just burning my tongue right now. But I would recommend the Bible. Always recommend the Bible. It's always good. Thank you. Appreciate that. This is from Christine. Are you aware that the Dead Sea Scrolls are not from the Essenes as first thought, but actually from John the Baptizer, who actually came from a line of high priests and from the line of Aaron? Well, I would suggest that there's probably some debate about that claim. The Dead Sea Scrolls, to suggest that they were all from John the Baptizer, I would find that hard to believe. There's a huge amount of scholarship. I mean, ancient scholarship, right? There was a lot of writings that would take, I don't know how long. It would take a very long time for one person to write all that stuff. So I'm not sure who's pushing that theory. I would be careful about that. I'd be quite skeptical, actually, about that. And, there's a lot of good, careful scholars that have spent their lifetime looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the idea that it's all just from John the Baptizer, I think that is something that is not at all established in academic circles. Again, these are guys that make it their life's work to become experts in this. So, I'd be careful. Sometimes we hear things on YouTube and other places that just lack scholarly standing. So I'd be very careful about that. Thank you for that question. So Brilliant Radiant says, Chazak uvaruch, be strong and blessed. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. This is from Marge. Hi, Doug. What do you think about blood transfusions, organ donation? Thank you so much for everything you do. We really appreciate it. God bless. Well, I don't see any problem with blood transfusions or organ donations. I think saving a life is a very noble and godly priority that we should take. And if we can give blood, or in the case of a person receiving the blood, I think that's great, because you're saving a life, and saving a life is loving your neighbor, right? So if we take the two big principles, love God, love your neighbor. Well, loving my neighbor certainly means to not murder him, right? That's one of the things it means to love my neighbor. And then I'm supposed to go and help my neighbor, or even my enemy that I don't even like, but I'm supposed to help him. If his donkey's in a ditch, I'm supposed to help him out. We know that Jesus was accused by the Pharisees for healing people, for saving a life on the Shabbat. And of course, that was absolute nonsense. It's always good, even on the Sabbath, to save a life. So I don't see a problem with blood transfusions or organ donations. I think they're perfectly fine. I don't see that the Bible condemns it. What the Bible does condemn is to drink blood. By getting a blood transfusion, you're not drinking blood. It's just not the same. Now, obviously, there can be inherent dangers. We understand that. But you're getting a blood transfusion because you're going to die. So, which is very different than, I just killed my enemy. I'm going to go drink all of his blood and somehow get his power, get his vital energy. That's what people were doing when they were drinking their enemy's blood. And that's a far cry from getting a blood transfusion. So thank you. I appreciate that. All right, this is from Diana. She says, the Bible says we will be awarded treasures according to our works. Does this mean we'll be stuck in a level permanently in heaven, or is it only referring to the millennium, which is temporary? All right, well, there's kind of two questions in there. First of all, the millennial reign happens here on earth. And guess what? Where does the question, pop quiz here, where does the New Jerusalem come to? Answer? Earth, right? So the whole thing, the millennial reign, which is 1,000 years, of course, and then eternity, all happens here on planet Earth. There's no up yonder, by and by. Those streets of gold are going to relocate here. The New Jerusalem is descending. We see that very clearly in Revelation chapter 19 and 20, specifically 19, that it's descending to the earth. And it's going to be here. So there's absolutely no question about that. And it's going to be a permanent thing. Now, insofar as being stuck permanently, let's go to Matthew chapter 5, because Jesus essentially answers this question for us. Matthew 5:19, we'll start at, Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. And also, let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Paul is referring to building on a foundation, which is Christ, but for no other foundation can anyone lay than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now, if anyone builds on this foundation, on Jesus Christ, with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw. So these are the basic things that you can build with, these 6 different things. Each one's work will become clear, for the day will declare it, because it will be revealed by fire. And the fire will test each one's work of what sort it is. If anyone's work, which he has built on it, endures, he'll receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved, yet so as through fire. So, when the 24 elders are there in Revelation 4 and 5, and what do? They take their crowns and they lay them down at the feet of God. Now, God doesn't need crowns. He doesn't need gold. He doesn't need jewels. Everything belongs to him already. So the blessing is for me that I have something based on my works. I have something that translated into the age to come. And it's going to be something. It's going to be gold, silver, precious stones, or wood, hay, and straw. Now, what happens to wood, hay, and straw when they are exposed to fire? Right? They just go up. They're gone. And that's the end of those. So when, if the things that you were doing in this life translate into wood, hay, and straw, well, there's your reward. And your reward in the fire of God does not withstand the test, and it's gone. And Paul says, look, you will suffer loss. You'll suffer loss. If anyone's work is burned, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved, yet so as through fire. So there you'll be. You see the 24 elders, they got their thing to offer to the Lord, their token, their offering, their tribute to give to God. God, this is all I have. This represents my life, this crown of my faithful service to you, and I'm giving it to you. And you'll be there and you'll be like, I've got nothing to give, nothing to offer, right? So you'll get to enjoy the glories of the age to come. You get to enjoy God's presence, but you'll have nothing to offer. And there could be one other aspect to this. And I don't know this absolutely, but what I sense is that insofar as I am transformed in my character and in my values and in my life, and when I'm transformed more and more and more into the likeness of God, then I get to enjoy God more, because having gone through the tests and the fire and the tribulations and then earning that token, whatever it is, gold, silver, precious stones, that's just a token. It's a demonstration of what I've learned and what I've gone through. And as I have gained more of God's character, gained more of his likeness, it's not something I can buy. I can't cheat. There's no microwave option. It's definitely a slow cooker through life that we have to go through these things. And I'm transformed and conformed into the image of God. And I share in the fellowship of his suffering. Then I understand, right? Think of it like this. Let's say you have some war veteran buddies. Maybe they were in World War II, maybe they were in Vietnam War, maybe they were in Iraq. Okay. And here I am. I'm invited to this party to go hang out with these vets. Now, I have a decent education, so I can keep up with them and their talk and their conversation. I have other things to bring to the table, but there's one thing that I will never have any association with them. And that was that they went to war and I didn't. Even though they like me and they think maybe I'm funny or whatever, but I do not share that joint experience of going to war. And so because I don't share it, I cannot enter into that fellowship. And if we do not go through the trials in this life, then when we're with God, we're going to, again, enjoy his presence and all the good stuff that there is to offer and what's available. But I will not experience God. I will not understand him and fellowship with him on the same level as somebody like Paul or Peter or one of the many people that have been martyred as missionaries, etc., over the last 2,000 years that gave everything, right? So I'll be there and I'll get to enjoy God. And probably it could be that I won't even know the difference, right? Because I won't know what I don't know. I won't know what I'm missing because I've just never experienced it. But the people that were willing to put their foot in and then go in all the way, they're going to experience something that somebody that kind of skimmed by, that was saved yet so as through fire, is not going to experience. So when you think about this, I would just suggest that the treasure is not so much the token. It's not so much the gold or the silver or the precious stones, because there's going to be oodles of that. It's not going to be like a really big deal at that point. There's going to be gold everywhere. There's going to, whole gates are made out of pearl. The sides of the walls of the New Jerusalem are just studded with precious stones. Okay, great. I mean, it's going to be gorgeous. So what's a few more? All right, that's not the point. It's that we are not going to experience God at the same depth and the same level as somebody that was willing to go all in. Thank you, Diana. Great question. That was really good. Okay, this is HVO. Shalom. I would like to know about 1 Corinthians 15:29. Otherwise, what will they do who are being baptized for the dead if the dead are not raised at all? Why are they also baptized for the dead? Okay, so this is a question. The Mormons have a whole doctrine about this, which is the baptism for the dead. As I've read this passage, the way I understand it, that Paul he's talking about the resurrection, of course. He's saying, look, you're going to die, but you're going to rise again, right? Pretty cool. And then he's asking the question, if it were not so, then why are we doing all these things? One of those things he questions is, look, why do we have this baptism of the dead? So let's go to 1 Corinthians 15:29 to get a better look at that. All right, so again, all this stuff is things are going to change. The last enemy to be destroyed will be death, etc. Otherwise, what will they do who are being baptized for the dead if the dead do not rise at all? Why then are they baptized for the dead? So, of course, the Mormons, I think, have taken this completely out of context. They've made a whole teaching and a whole doctrine based on this one passage. But what I would suggest is happening is that it's the washing of the body. So you know that when Jesus was crucified, they then took his body and they washed it. They prepared it for burial. So it's that idea of why take all this time to prepare somebody for burial if there's no resurrection of the dead. That's how I would read that, is that the passage there is talking about preparing the body, washing the body, potentially immersing the body. We know that there was a ritual bath, so-called ritual bath. Just call it a bath, what it was. So whether they were dunking this person or not, I mean, as somebody who was dead, we don't know. But they were doing this on behalf of the dead, for the dead, not in place of the dead, right? But they were doing this to the dead, so that their body could be prepared for burial. Thanks. Yes, thank you, Ed. I see your comment there. All right, this is from Cindy. Is the book of Revelation in chronological order? Well, that's interesting. We just had a whole question, a whole show on that on Prophecy Roundtable last Thursday. So if you want to check that out on my channel here. So I do that with John Haller and Scott Harwell. So the three of us, and we had a special guest. We had Alan Kirshner, Dr. Alan Kirshner on. So it was a lot of fun, in my opinion. All right, so I'll give you my perspective, right? The other guys can give you their perspectives, and Dr. Kirshner respectfully had a different perspective. But what I would suggest is that when you start looking at the passages, like in Revelation chapter 6, where in the sixth seal, all right, so if it were chronological, the sixth seal is, we're just getting started, right? I mean, this is it. But let's take a look at this, and I will kind of give you my spin on this and how I read this. And you guys you can take it or leave it. But this is what I've come to after looking at this for a very, very long time. So he says, when he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake. So keep that in mind. The sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood. I'm going to stop there really quick just to give you a cross reference. So in Revelation chapter 9, I'm just looking for my little cheat sheet, but it's not giving it to me. So I'll just go there old school here. So Revelation chapter 9, so we have this star that falls from heaven. To him was given the key to the bottomless pit, and he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke arose out of the pit like the smoke out of a great furnace. So the sun and the air were darkened because of the smoke of the pit. All right, so that I think is really significant, because here back in Revelation chapter 6, he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood. Well, we just saw that when he opens the abyss, that smoke comes out of it, and that smoke is going to cover the sun, and it makes it look like sackcloth. We have lots of pictures of this. The volcanic eruptions that happened in 2011 in Iceland did that very thing. When you looked at the sun, it looked like you were looking at it through a filter of sackcloth. When you look at the moon through smoke, it looks blood red. I would suggest that is the point. And this isn't the only place where we see this phenomenon. We see it in Joel. The earth quakes before them. So that in Joel chapter 2 is talking about that same horde of creatures that's coming out of the abyss. We see in Joel 3:15, the sun and moon will grow dark and the stars will diminish their brightness. Why will they diminish their brightness? Because of all the smoke that is coming upon the earth. We also have in Isaiah chapter 13, it talks about this crazy time that's coming upon the earth. Let me just get to that. Wail, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It comes in destruction. Therefore all hands will be limp. Every man's heart will melt. They will be afraid. Pangs and sorrows will take hold of them. They will be in pain, etc. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel, both wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate. The stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. This is the end of the world. He says, I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will halt the arrogance of the proud. Right? So look, we know that Antichrist is going to be talking smack for 3.5 years roughly. And during that time, he's going to blaspheme those who are in heaven. So, when we take a look at the rest of this passage, this right here, in my opinion, tells you that it cannot be chronological, because we're only in the sixth seal and it's already the end of the world. Notice, and the stars of heaven fell to the earth as a fig drops its late figs when it's shaken by a mighty wind. Where else do we see that? Well, we see this in Isaiah chapter 34, which here it is. Isaiah 34. This is amazing. All this stuff. For the indignation of the Lord is against all nations, his fury against all their armies. Don't we know that all the nations of the world are going to come against Jerusalem? Yes, we do. And so this is what we see there. He has utterly destroyed them. He's given them over to the slaughter. Also their slain shall be thrown out. Their stench shall rise from their corpses. And all the mountains shall be melted with their blood. All the hosts of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled up like a scroll. All their hosts shall fall down as the leaf falls from the vine, and as fruit falling from a fig tree. So this whole thing here is it's the same thing we see in Revelation chapter 6. Notice also, for my sword shall be bathed in heaven. Indeed, it shall come down on Edom. Now, this whole thing is just crazy. And I'm working on this in yet another book I'm writing, that his sword will be bathed in heaven. I won't get into all the details, but there's going to be a battle like literally in the sky. Okay. I mean, it's going to be in the sky. Jesus is going to be fighting who? The host of heaven. This is not talking about stars and comets and that kind of stuff. It's talking about the host of heaven, which God is the Lord of hosts, right? He is the Lord of the heavenly armies. So this is the heavenly army, the bad guys, right? This is Satan and all of his dudes. And he is going to fight them. So again, we're still in Revelation chapter 6. We've barely gotten through some of these things. And I mean, for me, this is a slam dunk. I think that this right here tells us that we cannot read this chronologically. It says, then the sky receded as a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place. That is an end of the world type event. You don't have this happening twice. This is it. This is the end. The sky receded as a scroll. What does that mean? Now, very respectfully, when Dr. Kirshner was on my show, he was saying that this is theophonic language. And I'm like, I think that's just kind of a cheap shot, quite frankly. And again, I very much respect him. But sometimes when people, or let's say theologians, I'm not saying him, but the theologian that kind of coined that phrase, they come up with these little phrases that sound good, and because they're in Greek, people don't understand them. And so, wow, that's just theophonic language. I would disagree with it. I would say that's just kind of an excuse, that we cannot read these all in chronological order, because in the sixth seal, we're already coming to the end. And notice what the kings of the earth say. And the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the rich men, every mighty men, every slave and every free man hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains. By the way, that is exactly what it says in Isaiah chapter 2, which is all about the end of the world as we know it, right? It's about the return of God. It's about him establishing his kingdom. It's about him throwing down everything that is proud, and that only the Lord of hosts will be exalted in that day. So look, since the fall of Adam and Eve, there has not been a day where only God has been exalted, because Satan is on his little throne and he's exalting himself. And we know that it's going to only get worse, that in the millennium, in the tribulation, there we're going to have the Antichrist, who's called, he's the one blaspheming heaven. He opens his mouth and he blasphemes those in heaven and God. He's called, they say he's pompous in the book of Daniel. So, he's going to keep talking smack until Jesus comes down and deals with him, which of course he will. So what do these men say about that time? These guys are hiding because they know things are in trouble. And they say, fall on us, hide us from the face of the Lamb, hits him who face of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath has come. And who's able to stand? So this isn't just something that they're like, this was really bad, but it's not. No, this is the end. And so then what we see in Revelation chapter 10, we will go there. Notice that after seeing all these different things, then the angel says, he said to me, you must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings. So that right there tells us that the book of Revelation is not written in a strict chronology. I'm not going to say that there's no chronology. There is some chronology, but it's not a strict chronology. What I mean by that is it's not the first seal, then the second seal, then the third. And then after that, we have the first trumpet, the second trumpet, and they're all just in succession, and they keep building and building. What I would suggest is that it's more like the Russian nesting dolls. We have this kind of expansion. Sometimes it's an expansion. Sometimes it's a repeat of the theme. Sometimes it's an expansion of the theme, and sometimes it's a finality of that theme. But they're not all different, distinct, separate events, but they're all interrelated events. And to be fair, I think that's part of the challenge of reading the book of Revelation, is that you have to keep those things in mind. And I won't say it's easy, but I do believe firmly that is part of it. Let me just share one more passage while I'm here in Revelation. Because in Revelation 16, we have, of course, the Battle of Armageddon. So here, so Jesus is going to come at this point. We have the noises, thunderings, and lightnings, which we see many times throughout the book. I would suggest those are all the same event. Babylon is dealt with. Then every island. By the way, the word then in most places in the book of Revelation is the word and. So then gives you the wrong impression. It makes you think that it's a succession word, right? This, then that. But it just says this and that most of the time in the Greek. So and every island fled away and the mountains were not found. Well, where did we see this already? We saw this in chapter 6. So how can you have every island fleeing away and the mountains not found? I live near the Rocky Mountains. If those things move an inch, we're all dead. But that they're going to just move out of their place, and every mountain on the earth, every island. Remember when Japan moved an inch back in 2011? That was earth-shaking, right? So now imagine every island and mountain moving on the face of the earth. That sounds like kind of like an end of the world type event to me. I just don't see how we can have that happening 2 times, right? And it's going to be the biggest earthquake ever. There's never been one that big, and there will never, ever again be one that big. So we see this in both places, that this is the big one. This is the mother of all earthquakes. It doesn't get bigger than this, and it will never get bigger than this. So I would say that both 16 and chapter 6 are talking about the same event. All right. Thank you, Cindy, for that intriguing question. That was fantastic. Okay, I'm going to let you guys kind of talk through that on your own. We only have about 5 minutes. This is crazy. Okay, this is from, hold on. I clicked on it and then everything moved. So let's go back to Ms. Awesome, excuse me. Why do the religions, such as Catholicism, have their Sabbath on Sunday and not Saturday? Well, it's interesting. Ironically, it's the Catholics who are a little bit honest about this. They are very clear that the Sabbath did not move. In fact, there was an article written in the Catholic Mirror back in 1897, I think it was. And the Catholic priest who wrote the article was arguing that the Sabbath is on the 7th day. He was saying, look, it's on the 7th day. God never changed it. He says, we, the Catholic Church, decided to worship on Sundays, because that's the Lord's Day. That is the day of the resurrection. And so therefore they decided to worship on Sundays. And it was the Protestants, right, around 1600 AD, who were already in that tradition, then broke off from the Catholic Church and never went back to the Sabbath. And so the Catholics are saying, look, we admit that we changed it, right? We admit that it's not in the Bible, and we change it because we think we have the authority to change it, to worship on that day and to declare that day to be the day that we're supposed to worship. But they're very clear that the Sabbath is still, God's Sabbath is still the seventh day. And they would say, look, you Protestants, either come back to the mother church, or go worship on the Sabbath. But don't keep worshiping on Sundays, because that's the day we said to worship on. So I appreciate their candor. I think it was perhaps an oversight on their part to not worship on Saturday, but that goes back as a very long history. That probably goes back to maybe Antiochus IV, but certainly after Christ, we start looking at Marcion, who in the 2nd century, by the way, I have a teaching on that, Haunted Theology. Check it out, Haunted Theology. It's on my YouTube channel. Anyway, it was Marcion who was very anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, anti-Sabbath, anti-Torah, and he hated the Sabbath. So this anti-Sabbatarian perspective really goes back to him. And if you look at the writings of Irenaeus, Tertullian, they say, look, Marcion is against the Sabbath because he doesn't like the Bible. He doesn't like the Jews, etc. So I think those are just some things to think about. All right, this is from HVO. Oops, did I miss one? Hold on. I did. I missed a couple. This is a bummer. Sorry, guys. Let me get back to some of these questions. I'm not sure how because there's 2 questions from Mr. Awesome. That's why. Okay. All right. Well, real quick. Do you think last night's conjunction has any biblical importance? Excuse me, Ms. Awesome. My bad. I don't know. I just don't know. All I could do is speculate, and I have no idea. I think we will find out. It's always easier to see things after the fact. It's really hard to see them when they're happening or to predict what they mean. It could be just a really cool conjunction of these 2 planets that we see and makes a bright star in the night sky, or nothing. And I don't want to say, but it is interesting, and I am going to wait and see if it indeed means something. So, all right, this is from Brilliant Radiance. How likely, according to Jubilee cycle, do you think God will return to the Feast of Trumpets 2045? Well, I had a guy on a couple of months ago who was very much into the Jubilee cycles. He wouldn't put it at 2045. He would say that it was by 2033, I think, is the year that he put it at. So yeah, 2020 plus 13. So he would say probably late spring of 2033. I don't know. I found his numbers interesting. I don't know that they're accurate, but they were very interesting. He gave a great defense of his position. So I don't know. I'm going to have to just kind of wait and think about that one. So, all right. Let's see. DOM, I'm going to skip your question. My favorite book. I don't know. I can't think of one right now, but I appreciate it. So, all right, this is from Diana. How is it possible the thief on the cross went to paradise, yet we all have to wait until the last day? Thank you. That's a great question. Some people resolve that by saying, today, I say to you, be with me in paradise. In other words, Jesus saying, look, I'm saying today on Thursday that you're going to be with me in paradise, and not necessarily that I'm saying that you'll be with me today in paradise. I don't know if that's fair or if that's kind of cheating. It kind of seems like it's cheating to me a little bit, but I don't know. So it's an interesting question. There's certainly some mechanics of the afterlife that we do not yet understand fully. We do know in Revelation chapter 6 that there will be souls under the altar. And when it talks about being with the Lord, could it be that the souls, these disembodied souls, are there under the altar waiting, hoping for a body? How much longer, Lord? Just a little bit, right? So, I don't know. We have that. Then we have Daniel where he says that you're going to sleep. Paul says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Does that mean to be under the altar? So I don't know. I wouldn't make really a doctrine of that. But what I can tell you is that we're not going to be up in heaven. The moment you die, you're up in heaven and you're driving your limousine and you've got your big fat mansion. A lot of that is just Christian myth that we don't find anywhere in Scripture. But because things have kind of gone from here to there and they've gotten bigger over time. So, I don't know. But thank you. I appreciate the question. I don't have the final answer to that one. I'm sorry about that. But it's an interesting question. All right, man, we are out of time, guys. I'm going to see if there is a really quick question. Okay, this is from Robert. Revelation 22:15. Those who are these outside the gate? This is the last chapter, and after the great went through judgment. So, Robert, the way I read those three chapters, Revelation 20, 21, and 22, as I was suggesting, that Revelation is not a strict chronologically laid out book. So when you look at Revelation 22, verses 1 and 2, let me take you there. And so he says, and he showed me a pure river of life, water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding from the throne of God and from the Lamb. In the middle of its street and on either side of the river was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. So if something is for the healing of the nations, that means that there are people that need to be healed. So if we are in the so-called eternal state at this point, then nobody would need healing because everybody already has their new bodies. What I would do is I would put chapter 22 in the midst of chapter 20. So chapter 20 is giving us this kind of big perspective, and really it's about the devil, okay? Here's what happens to the dragon. He gets put away. While he's put away, some things happen, and then after the 1,000 years, he's let out, and then he does these awful, terrible things again, right? And so that's the essence of this chapter. And then we have the great white throne, where we have this final judgment. And then we go to chapter 21. And again, I would put 21 in that same context, that the new heavens and new earth do not happen after the 1,000 years, but they happen at the beginning of the 1,000 years. And I understand that mine is a minority perspective, but in my defense, I would say that I spent many, many, many years trying to work that out. And I really believe that is the way to put all those together. So the people that are outside, per your question, that verse is one of those things that I'm like, wait a second. In fact, when we go back to Revelation 22, verse 14, notice it says, blessed are those who do his commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life and may enter through the gates into the city. So if the city is on the earth during the millennium, and people have the opportunity to go into the city, but to go in, they need to go through the river of life, right? So, in fact, there's a manuscript issue here. Is it those who wash their garments or those who do their commandments? Or maybe it's both. But either way, they then have the right to the tree of life, and then they can go in through the gates of the city. The tree of life, we just learned back here in verse 2, the tree of life is all about the healing of the nations. So again, there's people that are, we could call them sick or we could call them mortal, and they need to be healed. So those people who do his commandments or wash their garments, they then get to have the tree of life and may enter into the gates, in the gates of the city. But outside of the dogs, sorcerers, sexually immoral, murderers, and idolaters, and whoever loves and practices a lie. These people do not get to go in because we are not in the eternal state at this point, but we are in the millennial state. But the new Jerusalem is on planet Earth. And so that that's a really quick snapshot of how those fit together. And thank you guys. This was fun. Love your questions. If I didn't get to it, bring it next week, and I'll try to get to it. So God bless you. Take care. Stay in the Word.